Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. A very good evening to all of you on this webinar on Sindh Sales Tax on Services organized by Members Affairs Committee of ICAP. Basically, the idea is that Members Affairs Committee intends to launch a series on other laws related to compliance with financial statements that are applicable on audited financial statements. So this is the first program of the series. We formally start the program with the recitation of Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Now I would like to request Council Member and Chairman Members Affairs Committee, Mr. Salahuddin, to give please opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. A very warm welcome to all of you at this session. So I am very grateful that all of you have joined this first session on Max webinar on other laws and regulations. Today's session covers Sindh Sales Tax on Services. I am highly obliged and grateful to Mr. Ali Lakhani, Director Tax and Legal of one of the leading chartered accountant firms of Pakistan, Rayanda Haroon Zakaria, Amir Salman Rizwan and company. I'm sure this session would be a very engaging session for you people. The seminar or the webinar reflects MAC's commitment to highlight important laws and regulations that are relevant to all the audit engagements. Compliance with applicable laws and regulations is an important aspect of financial reporting and can significantly impact the financial statements. Therefore, auditors have to be very vigilant in appropriately addressing these matters, especially during the audit process. Accordingly, on the other side of the table, when it would come to Mr. Jalal and his team, they would also be considering these things in the clients you have audited and in their financial statements. So that is also an important aspect for you people. Today's topic, Sindh Sales Tax on Services, is particularly relevant due to its practical application and potential impact on entities and audit engagements. Just to solicit MAC's commitment that this is a beginning of a broader webinar series and we'll be covering further laws and regulations. आपके इल्म में होगा, हम पहले भी एक सेशन कर चुके हैं जिसमें हमने अपनी जो ऑब्जर्वेशंस थी, जो कॉमन ऑब्जर्वेशंस थी APRSP प्रोग्राम के तहत, वो हमने आप लोगों से शेयर की थी, दैट दीज आर द कॉमन ऑब्जर्वेशंस. और उसका ऑब्जेक्टिव जैसे हमने फ्रेमवर्क में भी कहा है, इज बेसिकली सपोर्ट. So all these are support activities which MAC and the current council is committed to provide to all our practicing members. So through this webinar, we aim to provide you with practical insights into regulatory areas and frequently arising issues, and basically a support for auditors to perform high quality audits. All of you are, I'm sure, performing high quality audits. So our this step is just a humble support from MAC for the objective. So I encourage all the participants to engage with the presenter. Mr. Ali Lakhani is a very pleasant person, and I'm sure he will be dealing with all your queries and addressing to all your questions. So I wish you all a very productive and insightful sessions. Thank you very much, and looking forward for more webinars and more sessions and more interaction with all of you. Uh, Highly grateful again to all of you for joining this session. Mr. Ali Lakhani for volunteering to be a technical lead in this session. Mr. Ajlal Haider and his team, all the colleagues at ICAP for organizing this session. So thank you very much. Over to Mr. Ajlal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we formally start the presentation. Before I just request Mr. Ali Lakhani, I would like to request all of you that in case that whatever questions that come up to your mind, kindly write those questions in the Q&A section. You can find that in the bottom of the screen. And you please type those questions in that time. So now, without further ado, I would like to request Mr. Ali Lakhani to please give us insight on sales tax on services. Thank you. Please, Mr. Ali.
First of all, thank you so much, Jalal and Salahuddin Saab, for the kind words and organizing this webinar. And I hope I'm able to add some great value and insights, especially with respect to practical difficulties, that as practitioners and as consultants we're facing with the Sindh Revenue Board, and also the Act itself. So with that being said, I'll just share my screen so that the participants are able to see the presentation, and then we will start. Okay. So I hope everyone is able to see,
Yes.
the slide deck. Is it
Yeah,
visible?
Visible, yes, please.
Okay. So just before starting, a quick few words. The goal of this webinar, or the goal of the session, is that to give you a broad understanding of the legislative framework of Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act 2011, and the various rules and notifications that have been promulgated, and give you more of a practical insight, because sometimes the law is different, but on the practical side things work differently. And I hope that whatever questions you guys have, as Jalal mentioned, just pop it or shoot it in the Q&A box. And later on, I'll try my best to answer your questions, to the best of my abilities. So with that being said, this is the agenda slide. So we're going to just quickly touch on the constitutional and the legislative framework. Then we'll talk about the chargeability and the scope of services sales tax. Then we will discuss some key definitions. We'll talk about the value of taxable services, the various classifications, the first schedule, second schedule, exemptions, reduced rates. Then we'll just talk about the registration requirements. Then we'll move on to the input tax, how input tax is determined, what are admissible items, what are inadmissible items. Then we'll briefly touch on special procedures, return filing, assessment, and enforcement. And then we'll also obviously talk about some practical case studies, because there are lots of issues which are pending litigation, because services sales tax right now in Pakistan is an evolving subject. A lot of matters have already been decided by the high courts. Most of them are currently under adjudication. So we'll talk about all of these things. So firstly, I would just like to reiterate that I'm sure everyone knows that after 18th Amendment, as far as sales tax on services is concerned, that was transferred from the federal domain to the respective provinces. And then each province, legislated and promulgated its own Sales Tax on Services Act. The reason being was that after 18th Amendment, in the Constitution, there were two lists: the federal legislative lists and the concurrent legislative list. The concurrent legislative list was the one where federation and provinces they legislated on the items which are listed in CLL together. So after 18th Amendment, the CLL, the concurrent legislative list, that was abolished, and item 49 of FLL, which is the federal legislative list, it was amended to exclude sales tax on services. So as you can see, this slide just gives you a brief snapshot that SRB, Sindh Revenue Board, which is the tax authority in Sindh, which legislates, enforces, and collects sales tax on services, that was formed in 2010. Sindh was one of the first provinces who took the initiative and then promulgated the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act in 2011. And then later on, various notifications came. It was followed by special procedures. In 2025, the Sindh Agriculture Income Tax Act was promulgated. And now, effective 1st January 2026, the agriculture income tax domain also vests with the Sindh Revenue Board. So, I mean, starting from January to June, in July, the first return will be filed, and people who are earning agriculture income now, they're required to file the returns with SRB and also pay the applicable income tax to the Sindh Revenue Board. So this is just a constitutional and legislative background. So this slide basically gives you a gist of the structure of the legislative framework. So obviously, the Act sits on the top. It's the parent legislation. Then there are Sindh Sales Tax on Services rules, which have various machinery provisions with respect to registration, invoicing, filing, and adjustment or determination of input tax, and so on and so forth. Then we have special procedures, which covers your withholding provisions and the online integration, especially of restaurants. Then in 2023, Sindh Place of Provision of Services was promulgated, and the collection agent rules were promulgated. And then after special procedures, there are various notifications and circulars which SRP promulgates, or notifies from time to time. So I'm sure all of the attendees know that a major shift happened in 2025 when SRB, in fact, I would say pretty much all the provinces, they shifted from positive list to a negative list. So positive list, I mean, previously, there were certain services listed under the first schedule which were taxable. And then there was a second schedule which kind of listed down the rates of those services. So only those services were taxable which were specifically specified. In 2025, a major shift happened. The taxation shifted to negative list, which meant that now all services are taxable unless and until specifically exempted. So now all the exempted services are provided under the first schedule to the Act, and all the reduced rate services with conditions are specified under the second schedule to the Act. And even there was a shift as far as the tariff headings. So previously they were, tariff headings were assigned to the taxable services. Now, in as far as SRB is concerned, we have shifted to what we called Central Product Classification Code. It's basically adopted from the United Nations, and that is what has been adopted by the Sindh Revenue Board. So this slide, the reason I inserted this slide is because, I mean, I'm also an avid reader of constitutional law. So, there are various judgments in which the principles have been settled that every fiscal statute, it has three essential limbs. The first limb is the limb pertaining to, the charging provisions, right? You charge a levy, you charge a tax. The second limb pertains to what we call assessment provisions or the machinery provisions to enforce or to to assess that specific levy which has been charged. And the third limb is the recovery provisions or the collection provisions. So every statute, just like Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act, it is also a fiscal statute. So it has these. I mean, this is the framework on which the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act stands. So there's preamble, date of commencement, then there's a definition section, then, as I said, the charging sections. Then there are provisions pertaining to the assessment and compliances, and finally, the recovery provisions. So, just to give all the attendees and the participant a bird's eye view of sales tax on services in Pakistan. So, I mean, as everyone knows that VAT, value addition, tax on services, it's a consumption based tax. It's an indirect tax, but it is consumption based, and ultimately, just like any just like sales tax on goods, this is also ultimately paid by the final consumer. In Pakistan, as everyone knows, that we are under a self-assessment scheme, whether it's income tax or sales tax, and it is then backed by the assessment and the audits. Then the third point is with respect to goods versus services. I think this is a debate which will probably go on in Pakistan for the next decade. I mean, if you look at the Indian jurisdiction, they have now legislated, and they're much more mature when it comes to classify what is goods, what is services, because I mean there are lots of products where there's still confusion, and which we'll see later on in our presentation, that there's a lot of debate as to a product, whether it's a good or whether it's a service. The fourth point is again very common. We see this in our practice almost every day, that there are jurisdictional there are clashes between the federation and the provinces, even amongst the provinces themselves. So to address the issues between the federation and the provinces, the government has created a Council of Common Interest. It's basically a body which has representatives from both the federation and the province, and they basically try to resolve any disputes or any issues. For example, I'm sure everyone is aware of the toll manufacturing issue. Finally, it went to FBR. Same with the restaurants. It's now a provincial subject. So as I mentioned, that the legal regime of sales tax on services is still evolving. Lots of areas they continue to be deficient, because obviously a lot of the provisions, they haven't actually been enforced in practice as yet. Lots of litigation going on as well. Then there are obviously gray areas, which I just briefly touched on. Renting is a very hot topic. We will discuss that briefly. Turnkey contracts, hybrid contracts. Again, I mean, I see these cases being adjudicated in tribunals. Whether federal sales tax will come into play, whether service sales tax will come into play. Toll manufacturing, I think this is already decided. Then there's also another issue with respect to software. And there's still, I mean, there's a debate whether software is a product, is it a good, or is it a service? Then, as I mentioned, that litigation is pending, and we'll touch on that. Another principle that I wanted to discuss is because I think this is very important when it comes to sales tax on services, which is about origin versus destination. So the system in Sindh, the sales tax services system in Sindh, is basically essentially it's origin based. If you read the law, you will see that the government of Sindh is attempting to tax services based on origin. However, if you look at the global best practices, it is destination based, and there are certain advantages to that, which we'll just briefly touch on later. So, for example, if one reads Section 3(1) of Sales Tax on Services Act, it says that taxable services which is provided by a person from his office or place of business in Sindh, so that is a based on the origin. Then when it comes to services being consumed in Sindh, if the recipient is a resident of Sindh, the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act says that Sindh has the right to tax that service. So uh, I hope and I wish that in future uh, 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 we move towards a destination-based principle, because it's an accepted guideline also by OECD. It will help us in exports as well. So right now the situation is that as far as Sindh is concerned, we are predominantly origin-based, not destination-based. So as I said that the global norm is destination principle, and the idea is that wherever the service is consumed, that jurisdiction shall have the right to tax it. Um, one one very crucial aspect to that is, or crucial supporting point is that it helps avoids double taxation. I mean, if 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 taxation is done based on destination or based on where it's consumed, then it really removes, or it eliminates the gap of it being double taxed. Because right now, I'm sure you guys experience it in your practice that कि भाई पंजाब भी टैक्स मांग रहा है तो सिंध भी टैक्स मांग रहा है, पंजाब कह रहा है कि जो कंज्यूमर है वो पंजाब में है तो टैक्स हमें दो, सिंध कह रहा है कि नहीं भाई प्लेस ऑफ बिजनेस सिंध में है तो हमें दो. सो देयर वेरियस डिस्प्यूट्स गोइंग ऑन. देयर आर लॉट्स ऑफ सर्विसेज जो बहुत ज्यादा क्रॉस प्रोविंस भी चल रही होती हैं, although there are some place of provision rules for certain services, but still, there is debate, there are issues, and the reason is because of origin-based taxation. Moving on, I think now we'll just dive into the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act. So briefly, I mean, like any other act, we will start with the most important definitions. And definitions are provided in Section 2 of the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act. Subse important definition, the first one is the definition of a person. The relevant section is 2 subsection 63. A person is an individual, a company, agency, or association of persons, AOP, formed or established in Pakistan or elsewhere, the federal, provincial, or local government, a foreign government, its political subdivision, or a public international organization. Then there's a definition of resident, and this is obviously one of the crucial definitions of the Act. And the definition basically, first it talks about individual who in a financial year has a place of business in Sindh. So if I'm an individual, if I have a place of business in Sindh, and if I'm providing a taxable service, I'm a resident of Sindh, and I'm liable to pay the applicable sales tax to SRB, or a permanent Sindh address on CNIC, or a permanent representative to act on his behalf or to provide service on his behalf in Sindh. So as you can see, that they have pretty much covered every aspect, based on which they can make that person a resident of Sindh and then have the taxation rights on the service being provided by that individual. Then it talks about AOP or company, which in a financial year, again, has its registered office in Sindh, or its place of business, whether whole or part thereof in Sindh, in any mode, style, or manner, or a permanent representative to act on its behalf or to provide service on its behalf in Sindh, or the control or management of the AOP or the company, whether a whole or part thereof situated in Sindh at any time during the financial year. I mean, when one reads this definition, automatically it comes to a mind about the overlapping issues, right? I mean, if I have a place, just by virtue of having a place of business in Sindh, I'm a resident of Sindh. Then the place of business definition is provided under Section 2, subsection 64. And this is a dangerous definition, to be honest. It says a space in Sindh which the person owns, rents, shares, or otherwise occupies to carry on economic activity, including through an agent, associate, franchise, branch, or virtual presence, or a website, or a web portal, or through any other form of e-commerce by whatever name called or treated, excludes a liaison office. Now, why I say this is dangerous, because by reading this definition, it comes to my mind that even if I have a virtual presence in Punjab or in Sindh, then this means that I have a place of business in Sindh, which effectively means that I am a resident of Sindh. So this is dangerous, and this exposes me, obviously, again, overlapping of being taxed in multiple jurisdictions, and this is a practical issue that we face as well. And we have to be very careful, when we are identifying or defining the place of business of our clients, because that can have multiple implications. Moving on, the definition of service that is provided under 2 subsection 79. Now, the service definition, I will just read it out. It was amended as well. It was substantially amended, again, I believe, by virtue of Finance Act 2025. So it says service means any activity, facility, utility, or advantage, including the granting, assignment, uh, cessation, or surrender of any right. Now, the service definition has been, really broadened. What it was before and what it is now, it has been really, expanded. I would also like to read the two explanations because I feel that they're important. The first explanation is: a service shall remain and continue to be treated as service regardless whether or not the providing thereof involves any use, supply, disposition, or consumption of any goods, either as an essential or as an incidental aspect of such providing of service. Explanation 2: unless otherwise specified by the board, the service or services involved in the supply of goods shall remain and continue to be treated as service or services. Now, this has been intentionally added by the legislators of our province, just to ensure that the coverage is broad. And effectively, I am not a big supporter of such broad definitions because it opens floodgates of litigation, which we're seeing right now, actually. So, for example, as a practical implication, I've just given here an example of contracts or the turnkey contracts, which we will discuss in detail later on. How litigation is happening there. Then, there was this famous case. It's a reported judgment of Sindh High Court, where Association of Builders and Developers, they were issued notices. A lot of builders and developers were issued notices, and the Sindh High Court basically had one point of view. Islamabad High Court had another point of view. Peshawar High Court had another point of view. So there's this web of different viewpoints of different high courts, and obviously it just creates confusion because Islamabad High Court said that it's goods. Peshawar High Court said that a construction contract or a contract of works is services. Sindh High Court basically said that each contract or each case has to be looked at at its own merits. So the different point of views, and that causes confusion. And at the end of the day, the taxpayers basically they suffer. So the next slide basically will just briefly talk about a taxable service. Like, what is a taxable service? The relevant section is section 3, and it has essentially two limbs. I like to read it out. That it has two limbs of chargeability. The two limbs of chargeability under section 3. So first is section 3, subsection 1. A service provided by a person from his office or place of business in Sindh. So now, obviously, naturally, you have to connect it to the definition that we just read with respect to place of business and resident. So a service provided by a person from his office or place of business in Sindh in the course of economic activity, regardless of whether the recipient is resident or not. So it doesn't matter if the person to whom you're providing the service is a resident of Sindh or not. If you are providing a service from a place of business in Sindh, then that is taxable. This subsection deals with services provided by persons, regardless of whether those services are provided to resident persons or non-resident persons, as we just discussed. Then section 3, subsection 2, it states that a service provided to a resident person by a non-resident person in the course of economic activity, a reverse charge style limb, whether or not the resident is the end consumer for the purpose of subsection 2, where a person has a office or place of business in Sindh and another outside Sindh. The office or place of business in Sindh and that outside Sindh shall be treated as separate legal persons. So the first aspect of this definition is first. Let me just give a brief understanding of reverse charge mechanism. Reverse charge mechanism is that if I, as a resident of Sindh, I'm providing a service to a non-resident, then the act says that I, as a resident, am liable to discharge the applicable sales tax on that service. Although I'm not a recipient, but I'm a service provider, but because I'm a resident, then I have to discharge my tax liability. And that is basically what we call a reverse charge mechanism. And so the second aspect is, uh, and again, this is a dangerous aspect. It says that if I, as a person, if I have a place of business in the province of Sindh, and then I have a place of business under the same under the same legal person, if I have a place of business outside Sindh, say in Punjab, the law says that they will treat me as two separate legal persons. So that has serious practical implication as well when it comes to the cross delivery of services between or amongst the provinces. So Section 8, basically Section 8 is about the scope of tax. Section 8 tells you about the standard rate of tax, which I'm sure everyone knows it's 15%. That is the standard rate, unless and until a reduced rate is specified under the second schedule. And generally, I mean, at least before the Finance Act 2025, services a lot of taxable services, were notified as reduced rate through a lot of notifications. I mean, all these notifications are available on SRB's website, but you would have to see each notification, for various services. But now I think they have made it administratively a little easier. I mean, the second schedule has all the services which have reduced rates along with the conditions. But previously, it used to be a big challenge. You had to trace the notifications, when it came to responding to various notices and whatnot. So basically, this slide just gives you a snapshot of how the output tax is computed, how the chargeability basically is determined. So we talked about the definition in which we saw that it has to be a person delivering service from a place of business in Sindh. It has to be a taxable service. Now, as I said, that all services are taxable unless and until specifically exempted under the first schedule. In furtherance of economic activity, we will see economic activity section later on, and that would basically, you will have the value, you have to multiply it by the rate, whatever that rate is, and you will get the output tax. So I mean, now I hope that you guys understand, the positive list and the negative list, the first schedule, the second schedule, person, place of business, taxable service, and ultimately the applicable output tax. So as I said, economic activity, here it is, that is section 4. So economic activity, this is not the Bare Act definition that's on the slide, because the definition is quite it's quite lengthy. So what is included in economic activity? So any activity intended to involve the provision of services to another person, business, profession, calling, or trade of any kind, whether or not carried on for profit. So, practically a lot of people come and ask us that whether NPOs, not-for-profit organizations, are they exempt from the purview of sales tax on services? The answer is no. Just because you're carrying an activity. Okay, is it better now? Okay. So just because you're carrying, let me just do the play part 1 second. Let's go play. So I hope it's better now. 1 second. The visibility. Okay. So economic activity, So any activity. So yeah. So I was saying that we get this query a lot if not-for-profit organizations are exempted from the purview of sales of services sales tax. The short answer is no. Just because you're doing an activity for not-for-profit, that doesn't mean that it's not an economic activity. Supply or provision of movable or immovable property by way of lease, rent, license, or similar arrangement. This is a topic which is under litigation, and I'll just touch on the judgments later on when we get there. A one-off adventure or concern in the nature of a trade, anything done during the commencement or termination of an economic activity forms part of that activity. And this is important one, which I mean, I've seen a lot of people don't know about this. An employee's fee earning, any fee or commission, side activities and activities he performs for a third party on his employer's behalf, that is also an economic activity. Um, what is not included? Employment, and so an employee's services to his own employer. I mean, there should be an employment letter, and he should be a full-time employee. Then that's obviously excluded. A private recreational pursuit or hobby of an individual, that is also excluded. And then in 2025, the services of courts, tribunals, that was also explicitly excluded. So in practice, as I said about the NPO, there's another aspect which we see in practice is when there's a contract being negotiated or executed, for a service outside Sindh, whether that would form part of economic activity or not. That is really subjective, and facts have to be looked into. You have to see where the dominant aspect of the service is being performed and whether that service falls under the Sindh place of provision rules or not. So various aspects have to be seen to make a call on a activity that is primarily being executed outside Sindh. So the next important aspect is the value of a taxable service. Um, so I've just listed down, what constitutes a value of taxable service. So the general rule is the gross money consideration received from the recipient, obviously, consideration in kind. So where consideration in kind is involved, open market price, and you will see this mirrors a lot with the federal sales tax law. Related party transaction. If there's a reason to believe that the parties are related parties and they're doing a transaction which is not equal to what the value would have been if the transaction would have been done with an independent third party, then you have to take the price or take the value which is charged to that independent third party. Then if there's a reason to believe by the tax authorities that whatever the value which you have declared is not correct, and or the nature of the transaction is as such where it is very difficult to ascertain the price, then you go for the open market price parallel to the federal sales tax law. In such cases, what they have done is that they've said that the price will be determined or the value will be determined by a valuation committee. This is not the case under the Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act. If there's a trade discount, then you have to the value is the net of trade discount. But obviously, again, it is mirroring the federal sales tax law, where the discount should be in line with the industry practices. And then obviously, board has the ultimate power to fix the value of various class of services. One important thing that I really wanted to touch on value of taxable services is, and this is something practically, at least I get these queries every other day. This is also under litigation. So in finance, through Finance Act 2024, what SRB did was that they added a proviso. I believe this was section 5, subclause A, subclause 3. They added a proviso under the definition of consideration where they also added reimbursement of expenditures incurred by the service provider as part of the value of taxable service. Now, why they did this? They did this because they wanted to counter the effect of a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, and I've mentioned the citation if anybody is interested. And in that judgment, Supreme Court, High Court first held, and then the Supreme Court upheld the decision of the High Court that reimbursement, and that judgment was specific to salaries, but the principle was that any item that is essentially reimbursement in nature, obviously backed by documentary evidence, then that cannot be part of taxable service. Now, to counter this judgment, an amendment was promulgated through Finance Act 2024. Now, when they did that, this matter again went before the Honorable Sindh High Court, and till date, this matter is pending. I've given the relevant CP number, and the Honorable High Court right now has issued ad interim orders. They have directed that the payment of the sales tax on services shall be based on the position of the law that existed prior to the amendment. So this is the position right now, and I'm of the view that this amendment will be declared ultra virus, and the reimbursement simply cannot be made part of value of taxable service. Then we go to Section 9. So Section 9 basically it lists down the persons who are liable to pay the tax. Who is liable to pay tax? That is what Section 9 tells us. And if it says if service provider is a registered person, then primarily the liability to discharge the applicable sales tax rests with the service provider, obviously. When a service is provided by a non-resident person to a resident person, the liability to pay the tax shall be on the person receiving the service. So this is again the reverse charge mechanism, which we just talked about. And practically we see this a lot because there are a lot of clients, who are exporting services either outside Sindh or either outside Pakistan. Board is empowered to issue notifications specifying obligation to pay tax with respect to any service or class of service. And then the concept of joint and several liability. Okay. So now we talk about Section 17, which is the time, manner, and mode of payment. So again, this pretty much mirrors the federal sales tax law. So a taxable service shall be considered to have been provided in the tax period during which it was provided to the recipient. An invoice for the value of the taxable service was sent to the recipient, or consideration of the same was received, whichever is earlier. So again, in practice, we see when assessment proceedings are initiated by the department, we see this a lot, and generally, in for example, as far as take the profession of accounting or auditing, for example, or even taxation. Sometimes what happens is that notices are issued for a tax year after 2 years, after 3 years. So we got this case recently where we issued invoice to a client, and the invoice said that professional fee for the services rendered with respect to tax year 2021. Now that service was rendered in 2025, but invoice said 2021. So the tax authority made a case saying that that service was they deemed to understand, or they assumed that that service was provided in 2021, and they said that you did not declare that service in 2021, and they basically issued a show cause notice. Then we had to tell them that the narration is something else, but the service was actually delivered in the current tax period or in the current tax year. So this is one practical example I could think of. Then Rule 14 of the sales tax on services rules, that tells you about the due date. It's 15th, just like federal sales tax law, 15th day of the subsequent month of the subsequent tax period, and that's the due date for payment, and the return should be filed by 18th. Okay, so before talking about input tax and disallowance, I just wanted to touch on the first schedule to the Sales Tax Act. I wish I could share the screen with you. With respect to the first schedule, but just to give you a gist, that first schedule basically lists down all the services which are exempt under the Act, and it also gives out the conditions to basically avail those exemptions. So some of the major services are storage and warehousing of agriculture produce, export of IT services, accounting, auditing. That's a very common one which we get a lot. It is exempted, but there's a condition attached to it that you have to get the receipts through banking channel, and a proceed realization certificate should be there. Then education services below a certain threshold. I think it is 500,000 rupees, the threshold per year, the fee per year per student. So if it's below that, then that is exempt. Individual life insurance below a certain threshold, that is also exempt. So basically, the idea is that first schedule contains all the services which are exempt, along with the conditions for the exemption. So it's not a blanket exemption. You have to read the conditions as well. So common errors in practice which we see is that a lot of there's not much awareness about the conditions specifically. People don't know about the thresholds, and then they basically when they're filing the returns, they make errors. So one really has to make sure that they understand the conditions before declaring any services as exempt. The second schedule is basically it lists down all those services which are which have a reduced rate. It's a reduced rate list services. So you will see basically three different types of headings or the CPC codes. So either it's by nature of service, uh, by a specified service provider. So, for example, accountant or IT consultant, for example, or it might relate to the subject matter of the service. So, for example, if it's a renting service, for example, मैं थोड़ी बात session में हूँ. Sorry about that. So basically, there are three types of different variations when it comes to tariff headings. And always, I mean, there's this really landmark judgment of Supreme Court of Pakistan, Habib Safe Vault Deposit. That is the case. I mean, irrespective of the description of the service, the courts have held that substance over form will matter at the end of the day. So if say, for example, if a description of a service does not relate to the nature of the service, that is irrelevant. Substance over form will be looked at when, I mean, if it comes to adjudication or if it comes to assessment proceedings, substance over form will matter, and that will determine taxability at the end of the day. And then so basically, second schedule is again, if one has to look at those services which have reduced rate, you go through the second schedule. As I said previously, one had to go through a lot of these notifications. Now the second schedule, they have summarized all the services which come with a reduced rate, and also the conditions. So there are also conditions attached if you want to avail the reduced rate. So I think this slide tells you the general conditions for services liable to tax at reduced rate. So one thing is very important, and I've even our firms. I mean, I've seen that filing team in our firm sometimes makes these mistakes, which is that input tax against a reduced rate service, you will not be eligible to claim input tax against that. So just keep that in mind. If you are delivering a service that is a reduced rate service, the input tax reduction will not be admissible. Number one. Number two, there are certain services in which you have to basically actively file a option or e-file an option, which you can file it on the portal, that you wish to opt for the reduced rate. If you don't do that, then it will be deemed that you're discharging you are basically offering the service at standard rate. So that is something that people tend to forget. That they tend to forget to file an option. So that is very, very important as far as reduced rate is concerned. And I've highlighted, or I've just identified such services. For example, construction services, road transport, freight services, IT services, the reduced rate, I believe, is 3%, but again, you have to e-file an option for that. And all the details, you can find it in the relevant rules, how to e-file an option. So this brings us to the registration part, that who is liable to register, who must register under the Sindh Sales Tax Act. Obviously, it goes without saying that a resident of Sindh, the definition which we already covered and discussed earlier. The relevant section is section 24. Any person who provides a taxable service, right? Again, since after 2025, there is no restriction on specified service. So any person who's providing a taxable service, any person meeting any other criteria as prescribed by the board, a recipient of a reverse charge, service, which we discussed before in section 3, subsection 2. Again, you have to register. So these are the persons who must register. Then section 24A talks about voluntary registration, and 24B talks about compulsory registration. I'm sure in practice, at least we have seen our clients getting a notice where SRB says that we have identified, or it has come to a knowledge that you're providing a taxable service and you're liable to be registered. If you don't get registered, we will register you compulsorily and will impose a penalty of 100,000 rupees. So if your client is actually providing a taxable service, if you get that notice, and if registration is basically, you are obligated to register, then do register voluntarily, because then SRB waives off the penalty. Otherwise, once they register you compulsorily, then they will impose a penalty. So these are the important sections with respect to registration. Now, so there's some practical issues which I've highlighted. In a lot of cases, what happens is that sometimes you basically cross the threshold, or aapko pata nahi chalta. So you have to be mindful of that. And as consultants, as practitioners, you should basically be guiding your clients wherever reduced rate services are involved. And then sometimes, again, going back to the origin-based principle, if the service is being commenced from the province of Sindh, remember that as far as Sindh is concerned, you're liable to be registered, and so on and so forth. If you're entering into a contract, that signals that you're entering into an economic activity, you'll be executing an economic activity in Sindh, then registration requirement triggers. Okay. So consequences of non-registration, obviously, if you don't register and somehow SRB finds out that you're providing a taxable service and you were liable to be registered, the first thing they will do is they will register you compulsorily, which means that they will impose a penalty on you, as I just mentioned. Secondly, SRB can initiate assessment proceedings, and they can start to recover the tax which was not paid to SRB. Obviously, they have to go through the assessment procedure. They cannot just impose a tax directly. Then obviously there's default surcharge. Once they identify, or once they impose principal tax liability, they can impose penalties. I've mentioned one, serial number 1 of section 43. Section 43 is the penalty section under the Act. Then obviously they can impose default surcharge as well. So this slide basically tells you a practical implication, and we get these questions a lot from our clients, that what happens, that I voluntarily register with SRB. Will SRB come and claim the tax liabilities before or prior to the date that I was registered? Now, in that, there's a judgment of Sindh High Court. I've given the reference. And if anyone wants any judgment copies, you can let me know in the Q&A session, and I'll try and email it to you guys. So this judgment was also a landmark judgment at that time when this judgment was issued. So the case before Sindh High Court was there were 24 references, and the question before the court was that if the taxpayers who were unregistered with SRB, can they be assessed and can they be made liable for sales tax prior to their registration, either voluntary or compulsory. And in that judgment, the Sindh High Court adjudicated in favor of the taxpayers. Why? Because the main reason was that most of these references, in fact, all of these references, they pertained to a position of the law before 2021 amendment. So what happened was that if one examines the act before 2021, there was a difference, or basically there was a difference in section 3 and section 9. Pre-amendment 2021, the wordings were different. Post-amendment 2021, the wording was different. The word which was used pre-amendment was registered person in section 3 and also in section 9. After 2021, the word that was used was just person. So the crux is, or the conclusion is, that if we're talking about a period where SRB is trying to recover taxes from your client before 2021 position, then they cannot do that. Even if your client registered either voluntarily or compulsory registration was there, SRB cannot recover those taxes. Post 2021, yes, they can, although this question has not been taken up, or this question has not come under adjudication as of yet. But my understanding is, or my interpretation is, that if a case is where it's a post 2021 case, then SRB has a stronger argument saying that we can recover the liabilities at least after the 2021 amendment stage. However, as I said, that this matter has not been adjudicated in front of the courts. Who knows? If it goes before the courts, then maybe obviously there's other aspects involved as well. But one thing I just want to point out is the bottom line is that SRB has to go through the assessment and audit proceedings. They cannot just blanketly impose liabilities on periods prior to the registration. They have to go through the assessment or the machinery provisions. So now we'll briefly talk about input tax. Input tax, basically, first just let's look at the definition. It is provided under Section 2, obviously. And then the relevant sections are Section 15, 15A, and 15B. So input tax, basically, in relation to a registered person, means a tax levied under this act on the services received by the person, tax levied under the Sales Tax Act 1990 on the goods imported by the person, the tax levied under the Sales Tax Act 1990 on the goods or services received by the person, and provincial sales tax or ICT tax levied on services received by the person. And then there's a proviso with respect to notifications and whatnot. So basically, this is the definition of input tax. So again, any input tax which I've paid under the Federal Sales Tax Act, that's allowed, whether it's imported goods, whether it's local goods, services which I procure, that is also fall under the definition of input tax. Provincial sales tax, from obviously other provinces, and ICT, Islamabad Capital Territory, that is also defined under input tax. So just one important thing which I'm sure all the participants are aware of, that the right to deduct input tax, that is my right. The courts have held that is a vested right of the taxpayer and no one can take that away from me. So if you are facing a situation where a tax authority is saying that, hey, you cannot claim XYZ as your input tax on presumptions and without any rationale, then just remember there are various judgments out there of Sindh High Court, of Lahore High Court, of Islamabad High Court, and they have consistently held that input tax is a right of the taxpayer and it cannot be denied. So Section 15A basically gives a list, just like you have a list under the Federal Sales Tax Act under Section 8.1. So that is in Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act, that is Section 15A. Now, obviously, I haven't listed down all the items because it's a huge list of items. I mean, if one wants to go through it, Section 15A, subsection 1 is the relevant section. But generally, if you review it, you will see it is pretty much similar to what we have in the federal sales tax law, and that is why never be hesitant to use the principles which are settled in respect of the federal sales tax law when it comes to inadmissible input tax, and you can apply it on the provincial sales tax proceedings or adjudication, or when you are drafting responses to your notices. You can always use those judgments because the principle is there, right? So some examples of inadmissible input tax are goods, services not used for the taxable services provided by the registered person. Again, this is a very broad entry prone to litigation, and we see that frequently, in proceedings, either it's federal sales tax or services sales tax. Then the fake, false, forged, flying, or fraudulent invoices or invoices from blacklisted, suspended person. Again, this one is also very common. Um, and and I think this one is favorite of the federal sales tax authorities. But the principles have been settled up to the level of Supreme Court. There's this very famous judgment of Eagle Cables, I believe, which says that if the taxpayer, has complied with the provisions of Act, if it has a documentary evidence, then you cannot disallow the input tax merely on the fact that the supplier or the vendor or the service provider was blacklisted subsequently. Then, vehicles, again, this is adopted from the Federal Sales Tax Act. Vehicles and related parts, calendars, diaries, gifts and giveaways, staff, garments, uniform, entertainment, hospitality, utilities at employee residences. Utility at employee residences, again, I think I'm correct. There's this latest judgment, I think, of Supreme Court. It came with respect to the labor colonies that various sugar mills had, and I think Supreme Court adjudicated in favor of the taxpayers. That they can claim, or they're eligible to claim that input because it is related to the taxable activity. Building materials, each subject to a carve out. Okay, so I think this should be 15%, not 13%. This is incorrect in the slide. So basically, as you know, that SRB, the standard rate is 15%. So any input tax you claim, that will also be restricted to 15%. So, for example, if you have procured goods at the standard rate of 18%, your input will be restricted to 15%. And I'll tell you the specific clause, subclause. I mean, the specific subclause is 15A subsection 1, subclause J, and subclause double J, and then subclause K as well. So obviously, you cannot claim input tax beyond the standard rate. So that is the whole idea. And then the last one is capital goods, fixed assets not exclusively used in providing taxable services. Again, this is dependent on the facts, whether you can or not. And then this section 15B as well, which basically says that there are certain goods and certain machinery parts classified in the custom chapters, which you can adjust against output tax, which you have to pay in 12 equal installments. So chapters 84 and 85. So if you have input tax related to goods, machinery, and fixed assets, which are classified under these two chapters, 84 and 85. So you can adjust you can adjust the input against the output tax, but you cannot adjust it right away. You can only adjust it in 12 equal installments. So that is section 15B. So these are some of the practical issues that I was just, I just identified, and I've just put it down on the slide, pasted it on the slide. So obviously there's input tax under reverse charge mechanism. So there's a circular of SRB. I've given the reference, circular number 6 of 2020, because there was an issue that, how can I claim if I'm paying, if as a service provider, as a service recipient, how can I claim input tax which I have discharged under the reverse charge mechanism? So then a detailed circular was given by SRB, and they said yes, you can claim it, but you have to give the documentary evidence, for example, the invoice, obviously the payment proof, and then they also said that how you can do it, how the process under the portal, that how you can claim that input tax. So that circular, if anyone is interested, I can share that circular by PDF, but you can find it on SRB's website as well. And they have listed down in detail how you can. First, they've said yes, you can claim it, and the second is that how you can claim it. So they have listed down the process there. Uh, and this second point, as I mentioned before, that under the federal sales tax law, since the substance is the same, the principles, the settled principles, will equally apply to Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act as well when it comes to admissibility and inadmissibility of input tax. Another practical issue is, what about the purchases which were made before 6 months of commencement of business? Obviously, there are certain businesses, they can take time because you have to build the infrastructure, terminal operators, storage houses. So as far as that is concerned, unfortunately, I mean, right now, as far as I'm aware, there's no judgment on this, but I mean, the best thing practically you can do is that you can hold off, on to claiming that invoice, or you can speak with whoever the vendor is, and somehow make sure that the date is within the 6 months of commencement of your business, and that is how you can, practically claim that input tax. Another aspect is, when they say for the purpose of taxable service. Now, what does for the purpose of taxable service means, right? It is very, very open to interpretation. It really depends on the specific case facts. And, this is something that I myself am constantly arguing especially before the tribunals in various cases, where you have to obviously, connect or state the facts to make a case. Then there's payment through banking channels, whether it's procedural or mandatory, boarding, lodging staff of such companies, which is required in providing the tax. So this is, and again, there was a judgment of appellate tribunal where they held that if distributors are claiming expenses with respect to traveling, boarding, lodging, that is an allowable input tax. So input tax against those expenses is allowable. So that judgment, I haven't given the reference, but I can share it with you if you can write it down in the Q&A box. So these are conditions and time limits, which I am sure everyone is aware of. You cannot claim the window is 6 consecutive tax periods. The payments, the banking channel payments to your service vendors, it has to be made within 180 days. There's an exclusion when it comes to utilities and import. The 180-day, there is no requirement for the 180-day payment period. Then there are further restrictions. Those are listed under Rule 22A. That no input tax on goods services acquired for personal or non-business consumption, no adjustment which is barred under any federal or provincial law. Obviously, no carry forward input tax relating to tax periods up to and including June 2011. So this is a very important slide. Again, this has a very practical implication, or you can say practical relevance. This basically pertains to apportionment principles. This is very common in restaurants. So even I've seen people making mistakes, even though this rule has been there, since a while, but still people make mistakes. It's very important that where your client has a supply which is at standard rate and a supply which is at a reduced rate. Remember that you cannot claim 100% input tax against a mix of supplies, a reduced rate supply and a standard rate supply or exempt supply. You always have to apply the apportionment formula. You always will have to surrender a certain amount of input tax, which pertains to the exempt supply or the reduced rate supply. And I've seen, SRB imposing heavy penalties, causing stress and headaches to our clients if this is not done. And and SRB is also very smart. I mean, they don't hit you right away. They wait for a few months and then they hit you. So ensure that this is followed. So one of the key point for reduced rate supply is that again, so this point is there because previously reduced rate supply was not in the formula, and I think there was an amendment, and then they also basically introduced reduced rate as part of the formula as well when it comes to apportionment. And one thing I may add here is that I was really surprised to see that this is not the case when you look at the Punjab sales tax on services rules. I was not able to find this apportionment formula there. Maybe it's there now, but I remember last time I checked, it was not there. So this slide is basically just gives you an example of how the formula works. So if anyone needs to review it, you can review it after. I'll just share the slides so you can review this from an example perspective. So this slide basically tells you the determination of tax liability. It just gives you a snapshot that obviously your input tax, it shall be valid. It should pass the test of section 15, section 15A, the definition as we discussed, it should be valid. Admissibility, section 15A, it should be admissible. Obviously, if there is any apportionment you have to do that. If there is any restriction on adjustment, I think there is a restriction on adjustment as far as Punjab is concerned. I don't believe, at least I'm not aware, कि Sindh में ऐसी कोई चीज है. And then basically you have your eligible input tax, which you can adjust against your output tax, and whatever the resulting or the differential amount comes, that has to be discharged. Return filing. So return filing, or everyone knows it has to be done every month. Due dates we already discussed. Returns can be revised, but you need permission from the commissioner. One practical thing that I want to highlight is that if return is not filed for 4 consecutive tax periods, then you become inactive. And once you become inactive in SRB, trust me, it's a pain to basically have your portal reopened. It's a big hassle, so just make sure that your client remains active at all times, even if you have to file a return which is incorrect. File it, and then you can revise it later on, because I think there's a certain timeline before which you don't need approval from the commissioner, but at least don't take the risk of being inactive. So these are the common filing errors. Input tax being claimed outside the 6 tax period window. Non-apportionment is, as I said, is a very common filing error. Also claiming input which is not admissible. Omitting reverse, when it comes to reverse charge mechanism or reverse charge liability. Again, people don't implement that properly when it comes to filing. So I would say go through that circular number 6 of 2020. That is important. Deciding what is exempt, what is not exempt. Again, look at the first schedule, make sure you're meeting those conditions. Treating provincial input taxes as adjustable against a different province output tax. Again, just ensure that SRB limits or restricts it to 15%. Reduced rate, you cannot claim input, so remember that as well. These are the common mistakes that we generally see. So these should be avoided. It will just make your life and your client's life a lot easier. So withholding tax. So for withholding tax, I would like to share a different document. Although this slide is useful, but just give me 1 second. I will just share this one. Okay. So I hope you can see. Give me 1 second. Let me just share the right one. Okay. So this basically summarizes the withholding as far as the withholdings are concerned. when it comes to SRB. So the rule of thumb is that 20% of the sales tax amount has to be deducted, and the remaining 80% has to be paid to the vendor or to the service provider, and 20% has to be discharged as a withholding agent. If the service provider is unregistered, then the service recipient will have to withhold 100% of the sales tax through a tax fraction formula. Tax fraction formula is defined in the Act, and I'll just, when I switch the screens, I'll show you how tax fraction formula works. Withholding agent will not withhold tax for the following services: so telecommunication, banking, financial institution. These are the terminal operator, airport ground services. Withholding agent is not required to withhold taxes in such services. And then there's some services for which you have to withhold the entire amount of sales tax. So, for example, advertisement, auctioneers, renting of immovable property. I'll come to that later on. As I said, that's a hot topic. Then intercity transportation. Then there are other cases as well. So in this case as well, again, if the person is unregistered, then you have to basically withhold the entire amount of sales tax based on tax fraction formula. As far as the category of withholding agent is concerned, I think as far as the province of Sindh is concerned, generally, obviously, limited companies, they fall under the domain of withholding agent. And then if one examines the definition of withholding agent under the withholding rules, federal, provincial, local, district governments, SOEs, regulators, these are the withholding agents. FBR or SRB registered person. So basically, if one examines the provisions of withholding as far as Sindh Sales Tax on Service Act is concerned, pretty much everyone is a withholding agent. And this is the formula I was talking about. I'm just going to zoom the slide again. So this illustration gives you an idea of the tax fraction formula. How does it work? Actually, no. Okay, so इसमें tax fraction formula नहीं है. But चले, I'll share the illustration with the attendees if anyone is interested. Basically, tax fraction formula को अगर आपको act में देखना हो, तो मैं आपको उसका relevant जो provision है वो बता देता हूँ. So it's section 2 sub clause 93A के अंदर tax fraction formula दिया हुआ है. So basically it's rate divided by 100 plus rate. So you have to assume के जो आपको सर्विस प्रोवाइड की गई है, जो उसकी वैल्यू है, उसमें ऑलरेडी सेल्स टैक्स शामिल है. So that is the whole idea. अच्छा, and one thing more कि यहाँ पे अगर कोई ऐसी आपका क्लाइंट है जो कि रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन नहीं है लेकिन विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट है, तो आप उसको एज अ विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट भी रजिस्टर करा सकते हैं. इनफैक्ट कराना चाहिए. So this basically place of provision services rules 2023. As I said कि बहुत सारी जगहों पे there are disputes between the provinces. So the good thing is that I think there's an inter-provincial committee है, IPC एक body है which deals with this. Then there's National Tax Council, I believe, as well. So there are certain services जहाँ पे provinces का आपस में consensus हुआ है कि कौन किसको tax करेगा. So for example, उसमें advertisement है, उसमें again I don't want to go into a lot of details, but advertisement के अंदर ये देखा जाता है कुछ केस के अंदर कि location of the broadcast station किधर है, पैमरा के राइट होल्डर्स जहाँ पे पैमरा के जो राइट्स हैं फॉर द चैनल्स वो कहाँ पर है, लाइसेंसिंग जोन कहाँ पर है, एंड सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. इंश्योरेंस के अंदर भी इन्होंने डिफाइन कर दिया है कि किसका कितना राइट है. ट्रांसपोर्टेशन केस के अंदर it's split equally between the province of origin and the province of destination, right? सो वो एक इसके इन्होंने स्पेसिफाइड एक पूरे रूल्स प्रोमलगेट किए हैं, दे कॉल्ड सिंध प्लेस ऑफ प्रोविजन ऑफ सर्विसेज रूल्स 2023. एंड इफ आई कैन लेट मी जस्ट सी अगर मैं आपके साथ ये चीज शेयर होती है नहीं होती, ओके गुड. सो दिस इज समथिंग दैट आई वर्क विद. इसका एक बेसिकली एक सिंपल सा एक टेबल बना हुआ है जो बड़ा आसानी से इट्स वेरी इजी कि आपने इसको देख लिया. एंड अगेन इफ एनीवन वांट्स दिस टेबल आई कैन share that with the participants. So basically एडवर्टाइजमेंट सर्विस हो गई, इंश्योरेंस सर्विसेज हो गए, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन हो गए, क्या कहते हैं पावर ट्रांसमिशन हो गए. तो उस पे प्रोविंसेस का एक इत्तेफाक हो गया है कि कौन किस तरह से टैक्स होगा. कुछ लोकेशन बेस्ड है, कुछ उन्होंने स्प्लिट कर लिया है 50-50, जैसे मैं ट्रांसपोर्टेशन का कहा. अगेन if you have any clients जो इस सर्विस कैटेगरी में फॉल करते हैं, आई वुड हाईली रेकमेंड कि आप एक दफा रूल्स को पढ़ लें, सो दैट जब आप रिटर्न फाइल कर रहे हो तो आपको पता हो कि हमें आपको सिंध को कितना देना है, पंजाब को कितना देना है, या केपी को कितना देना है. ऐसा ना हो कि किसी एक प्रोविंस के पास ज्यादा टैक्स चला जाए, देन इट बिकम्स वेरी डिफिकल्ट. वो दूसरा प्रोविंस इदारा आपको नोटिस पे नोटिस करेगा, और इनसे पैसे लेना आपको पता है कि इट्स इम्पॉसिबल. तो जस्ट मेक श्योर कि एक दफा आप रूल पढ़ लें उस सर्विस के हवाले से, एंड देन डिस्चार्ज द लाइबिलिटीज accordingly. So it's a very important planning point before you file returns for such clients. Coming back to the slide, so this slide basically talks about the POS integration and collection agents. Again, इसमें restaurants बहुत ज़्यादा common है. I'm sure आप लोगों ने देखा होगा. Every restaurants they have to be integrated with POS, and then उनका अपना SRB की अपनी एक API है जिससे आप लिंक हो जाते हो, and real time पे सारी इन्वॉइसिंग हो रही होती है. उसके साथ साथ कलेक्शन एजेंट रूल्स भी प्रोमलगेट किए SRB ने 2024 में, primarily because of Food Panda, which is a digital platform for restaurants, as everyone knows. And now what Food Panda does is that वो 50% उनका withhold करता है restaurants का, और वो I think Annexure C1 है if I'm not wrong. Because मैं फाइलिंग में ज़्यादा इन्वॉल्व नहीं हूँ, that is why I think Annexure C1 है जहाँ पे वो Food Panda जो withhold करता है वो वहाँ पे रिफ्लेक्ट कर रहा होता है. I think 50% withhold करता है. And then the restaurants obviously have to discharge the remaining 50% because Food Panda releases them the 50%. Very important point which we have seen practically is that जो restaurants होते हैं, for some reason कभी कभार जो सेल फूड पांडा ने जो टैक्स फूड पांडा ने शो किया था उसके हिसाब से वो सेल नहीं दिखा रहे होते, एंड SRB यूं पकड़ता है. सो जस्ट मेक श्योर और एटलीस्ट एडवाइज योर क्लाइंट्स के अगर फूड पांडा की कभी कभार ऐसा भी होता है टेक्निकल इश्यूज की वजह से दैट वन इज नॉट एबल टू सी द टैक्स व्हिच हैज बीन डिडक्टेड बाय फूड पांडा इन द पोर्टल, जस्ट मेक श्योर दैट योर क्लाइंट नोज दैट फूड पांडा का जितना भी टैक्स डिडक्ट होके वो जमा हो रहा है वो SRB के पास सारी इंफॉर्मेशन है. सो यू हैव टू इंश्योर कि आप अपनी सेल की मंथ एंड पे रिकंसिलिएशन भी कर रहे हो, और जो सेल फूड पांडा के थ्रू आपकी हुई है वो आप रिपोर्ट कर रहे हो, और उसका जो भी टैक्स बनता है वो डिस्चार्ज करो. दैट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज SRB विल नॉट वेट. वो आपको कॉल करेंगे या आपको नोटिस करेंगे, तो उससे पहले कुछ ऐसा हो, जस्ट मेक श्योर दैट योर फाइलिंग्स आर स्ट्रीमलाइंड. अच्छा, इसके अंदर एज यू नो कि अक्सर वी हैव सीन कि अगर पॉस की इनवॉइस में वो SRB का कोड नहीं होता तो आज कंप्लेंट्स हो जाती हैं, एंड देन वंस कंप्लेंट इज मेड देन SRB आपको नोटिस इशू करता है. वो रसीद की कॉपी फोटो कॉपी लगा के आपको नोटिस इशू कर देगा. तो मेक श्योर कि आपके क्लाइंट्स को पता हो दैट दे आर कंप्लायंट, पॉस की इनवॉइस कैसे इशू होनी है, क्या होनी है. अब तो खैर बहुत सारे वेंडर्स आ गए हैं, बट स्टिल always do this awareness sessions or learning knowledge sessions with your clients. It's always good. अच्छा, इसके बाद the next slide. So this is basically pertains to assessment and enforcement provisions of Sindh Sales Tax on Services. जो उसमें main है वो 23 and 47 है. 23 pertains to assessment. Assessment की भी various modes होते हैं. Standard assessment होती है which is under subsection 1. Then there is best judgment assessment. Again, these are concepts जो आपने income tax में भी पढ़े होंगे, I'm sure, या income tax में भी देखे होंगे. So standard assessment है, best judgment assessment है. Then obviously the law has given some procedural safeguards कि show cause notice जो है वो जब शो कॉज नोटिस इशू होता है तो ऑर्डर हैज टू बी पास्ड विद इन 180 days ऑफ इशूएंस ऑफ शो कॉज नोटिस, एक्सटेंडेबल अप टू 60 days. कोई भी ऐसा ऑर्डर cannot be passed without a show cause notice specifying the grounds within 8 years from the end of the tax period, uh, for periods ending on or before 30th June 2025, or within 5 years from the end of the financial year starting on or after 1st July 2025. यहाँ पे एक बड़ा important point है कि जब भी show cause notice आता है, the first thing you have to check is jurisdiction. You have to check लिमिटेशन पे भी आपको ध्यान देना होता है कि शो कॉज के बाद अगर ऑर्डर हुआ है तो क्या वो टाइम पे किया है नहीं किया, बिकॉज दीज आर द पॉइंट्स जहाँ पे अगर तो टैक्स अथॉरिटीज ने ऐसा ऑर्डर पास किया है जो जो टाइम बार्ड है, then obviously you don't have to go to the merits of the case and you can win the case right there and then. So assessment के जो प्रोविजन है सेक्शन 23 में ये सारी चीजें आपको मिल जाएंगी. Obviously this right of hearing is there. एक्स पार्टी अगर ऑर्डर करता है डिपार्टमेंट तो उनके पास एक रैशनल होना चाहिए. एक्स पार्टी ऑर्डर्स ऐसे नहीं हो सकते. अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ हियरिंग इज मस्ट, राइट. एंड देन अच्छा, ऑब्वियसली जस्ट लाइक हम दूसरे लॉज में भी देखते हैं कि लिमिटेशन में से टाइम की एक्सक्लूजन्स भी हो जाती हैं. अगर तो आपने कोई एडजॉर्नमेंट सीख की है या कोई एड इंटरिम इंजंक्शन है फ्रॉम द सुपीरियर फोरम्स, तो वो फिर लिमिटेशन में से माइनस हो जाता है, राइट. देन देयर इज सेक्शन 47 जो बेसिकली रिकवरी के ऊपर फोकस करता है. रिकवरी के सारे प्रोविजंस हैं उसके अंदर. So section 47, let me just open up the section. So it talks about recovery of tax not levied or short levied, right? So उसमें फिर आपको मिलेगा इनएडवर्टेंट एरर का जिक्र है, ओमिशन और मिसकैलकुलेशन. तो शो कॉज नोटिस जो है वो कितने साल में होना चाहिए. अगर कोई कलूजन या कोई मिसस्टेटमेंट है, फ्रॉड है जो कि एक सीरियस एलिगेशन है, देन द टाइम लिमिटेशन इज अगेन 8 years, राइट. सो दिस बेसिकली अप्लाइज टू ऑल दोज पर्संस जिन्होंने जो टैक्स ड्यू था वो जमा नहीं कराया, या जो टैक्स विथहोल्ड करना था वो विथहोल्ड नहीं किया. तो ये सारे आपको सेक्शन 47 के अंदर मिलेंगे. इसमें सबसे जो क्रक्स है ना, ऑब्वियसली देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ जार्गन हियर, बट जो क्रक्स है ना वो आपको ये देखना है. एक तो लिमिटेशन के हवाले से देखना है, फिर आपको ये देखना है कि शो कॉज नोटिस जब इशू होता है कि तो क्या उस शो कॉज के अंदर जो इंग्रेडिएंट्स होने चाहिए एक शो कॉज के, उसके ऊपर भी बहुत सारी जजमेंट्स हैं, वो है या नहीं है. इज शो कॉज ए वैलिड शो कॉज और इट इज अ डिफेक्टिव शो कॉज, राइट. एंड देन जब आगे ऑर्डर होता है तो कोई ऐसी चीज पे ऑर्डर नहीं हो गया हो जो जो आपको शो कॉज में कन्फ्रंट ही नहीं की गई हो. ऐसा भी बहुत दफा होता है. वी हैव सीन दैट एन एलिगेशन इज नॉट कन्फ्रंटेड इन द शो कॉज नोटिस, बट व्हेन यू सी द ऑर्डर, उस ऑर्डर में वो चीज आ जाती है. सो दीज आर सम ऑफ द पॉइंट्स व्हिच आई वांट एज अ प्रेजेंटर कि आप you take away these points as far as the assessment and enforcement provisions are concerned. बिकॉज टाइम लिमिटेशंस चेंज होती रहती हैं. एसआरबी में भी ये चेंजेस आते रहते हैं. पहले 120 days था, फिर 180 days हुआ. सो जस्ट कीप दीज थिंग्स इन माइंड. ये छोटी छोटी चीजें हैं जो आपको, अगर आप अपने क्लाइंट को रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं इन एनी एडजुडिकेशन प्रोसीडिंग्स, दे विल हेल्प यू आउट. यहाँ पे आई वुड लाइक टू हाईलाइट ए वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट जजमेंट. अच्छा, आजकल at least I've been seeing that a lot of my clients are getting notices under section 26 and 27, I believe, जो कि record से related है. Section 26 is basically records, bookkeeping, and 27 is retention and production of records and documents. Previously, SRB क्या करता था? SRB Section 52 के अंदर notice issue करता था. Section 52 भी pertains to obligation to produce documents and provide information. What happened was that Sindh High Court delivered a judgment, उसका मैंने हवाला दिया हुआ है, and in that judgment जो core crux था, जो Sindh High Court ने principle settle किया, Sindh High Court said that if there are no ongoing audits or if there are no ongoing proceedings against the taxpayer, then the department cannot ask for documents और फिर उसमें से फिशिंग एंड रोविंग इंक्वायरी करके कोई चार्ज फ्रेम करके या कोई एलिगेशन लगा के, फिर दैट कैन नॉट बी अलाउड. इस केस के अंदर सेक्शन 52 के नोटिस को चैलेंज किया गया था. एंड आफ्टर दैट जजमेंट सेक्शन 52 के नोटिस एटलीस्ट आई हैवंट सीन. अगर आता है तो ऑब्वियसली देयर इज अ जजमेंट टू काउंटर दैट. So SRB has now retorted or resorted to section 26 and 27. तो उसमें भी the principle is there कि अगर ongoing proceedings नहीं है तो फिर आप इस तरह से fishing and roving purpose के लिए you cannot just blanketly ask for all the documents के bank statement भी दे दो, audit accounts भी दे दो, ये भी दे दो, वो भी दे दो. There has to be some sort of कोई audit होना चाहिए. अगर आप section 23 की wording को देखें, और यहाँ मैंने स्लाइड पे भी लिखी हुई है, बेस्ड ऑन ऑडिट, इंक्वायरी, इंस्पेक्शन और अदर इंफॉर्मेशन. नाउ ऑडिट ऑडिट को भी की भी डेफिनेशंस आपको मिल जाएंगी जो प्रेसिडेंट्स हैं. इंक्वायरी क्या होती है, इंस्पेक्शन क्या होती है. अगर कोई ऐसी चीज है तो फिर आप असेसमेंट प्रोसीडिंग्स करें, लेकिन आप ब्लैंकेटली सारे डॉक्यूमेंट्स मांगे और फिर उस डॉक्यूमेंट्स में कोई चीज निकाल के प्रोसीडिंग इनिशिएट करें, ये कानून एटलीस्ट जो सुपीरियर कोर्ट्स हैं वो आपको इसकी इजाजत नहीं देते हैं. देयर इज अ डिटरेंट towards that. So this basically talks about offenses, penalties, and prosecution के क्या penalties आपके ऊपर लग सकती हैं. And I think section 43 है जो मैंने पहले भी डिस्कस किया था, उसके अंदर various आपको serial numbers मिल जाएंगे. I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time on this because ये ऐसी चीज है जो आप लोग पढ़ भी सकते हो कि क्या क्या offenses पे कितनी penalties हैं. एक हमने डिस्कस किया था about registration के ऊपर, जो कि वो 1 लाख की पेनल्टी लगा सकते हैं. We discussed that was serial number 1, right? फिर टैक्स फ्रॉड को की मैंने एक स्लाइड यहाँ पे एक बॉक्स डाला हुआ है, बिकॉज टैक्स फ्रॉड को अगेन डिपार्टमेंट या टैक्स अथॉरिटीज बहुत ज्यादा कैजुअली इसको इन्वोक कर देते हैं विदाउट अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि वो कितना सीरियस चार्ज है, और उसको प्रूव करने का ओनस जो है वो डिपार्टमेंट के ऊपर है, राइट? सो सेक्शन 43 में पेनल्टीज फ्रॉड के ऊपर भी हैं, नॉन फाइलिंग के ऊपर भी हैं, रजिस्ट्रेशन अगर आप नहीं कराते उसके ऊपर भी हैं. तो 43 को आप एग्जामिन कर सकते हैं, पढ़ सकते हैं, तो वहां पे आपको सारी पेनल्टीज आपको मिल जाएंगी. वन थिंग आई जस्ट वांट टू ऐड इज कि मेंस रिया और ये डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज, अब डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज के ऊपर एटलीस्ट बाइको की जजमेंट है सुप्रीम कोर्ट की, व्हिच आई एम श्योर एवरीवन इज अवेयर ऑफ, कि वहां पे एटलीस्ट एज फार एज द फेडरल लॉ इज कंसर्न्ड, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये वोट किया था कि मेंस रिया के लिए, डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज के लिए मेंस रिया की आपको जरूरत नहीं है, बिकॉज वहां पे वर्डिंग ऐसी है फेडरल सेल्स टैक्स के अंदर. जो आपका एसआरबी का कानून है उसमें भी यही वर्डिंग है. सेक्शन 44 मैं थोड़ा सा पढ़ देता हूं. डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज, notwithstanding the provision of section 23, if a registered person does not pay the tax or any part thereof, whether willfully or otherwise, यानी कि willfully यानी जानबूझ के या फिर अदरवाइज उसको डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज लगेगा. तो एसआरबी भी इसी चीज को फॉलो करता है और वो बाइको की जजमेंट का सहारा भी लेता है, एंड दे राइट, बिकॉज सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने होल्ड कर दिया कि डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज के लिए आपकी विलफुलनेस होना जरूरी नहीं. So that's an important point as far as section 44 default surcharge is concerned. So with that said, we'll just briefly discuss about the changes of Finance Bill 2026 के अंदर आई हैं in Sindh Sales Tax on Services Act. उसमें जो मेजर चेंजेस हैं उसमें आई वुड लाइक टू शेयर a different document because I think इसके अंदर सारी चीजें probably covered होंगी but इतनी clear नहीं है. लेकिन let me just share that document 1 second. So this one, I think आपको ये नजर आ रहा होगा. So जो मेजर चेंजेस हैं उसी पे मैं फोकस करूंगा. जो पहली मेजर चेंज है which I would like to highlight is that पहले आप 10% जमा कराते थे. सेक्शन 66 की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ. सेक्शन 66 के अंदर जब आपकी कोई अपील पेंडिंग थी और आपको 10% जमा कराने पे आपको ऑटोमेटिक स्टे मिल जाता था. दिस इज सेक्शन 66, रिकवरी ऑफ एरियर्स ऑफ टैक्स. इट्स proviso to section 66 subsection 1 कि when you basically deposited 10% of the amount of tax due, आपको एक ऑटोमेटिक स्टे मिल जाता था. वो 10% को इन्होंने 20% कर दिया है वाइड दिस फाइनेंस एक्ट 2026. एंड सेकेंडली इसमें ट्रिब्यूनल को भी लेकर आ गए, यानी कि आपका जो ऑटोमेटिक स्टे है पहले कमिश्नर 30 तक का था, अब उन्होंने अपेलेट ट्राइब्यूनल को भी उसके अंदर एक्सटेंड कर दिया है, उसकी कवरेज दे दी है। तो ये एक तरह से अच्छी चीज भी है, बुरी चीज भी है, बिकॉज आपको 10% की जगह 20% देना है, बट आपको ये सुकून है कि इवन ट्राइब्यूनल में भी है, अगर आपका केस चल रहा है कोई ऐसा इशू नहीं है, आपका स्टे फिर ऑटोमेटिक हो जाता है। एक ये मेजर चेंज है। एंड देन जो सेकंड मेजर चेंज है विच आई वुड लाइक टू फोकस ऑन इज द कंस्ट्रक्शन सर्विसेज वाला। So what they've done is that पहले एक construction की, and I think this is a better depiction. Let me just take you to the relevant page. Okay, so construction. Okay, so this is it. So existing position, अगर आप लोग देख सकते हैं तो existing position was that construction की first entry है second schedule में होती थी serial number 1, and there was a reduced rate of 8%. After the amendment, what they've done is that construction अब है, construction को हटा के इन्होंने ready mix concrete कर दिया है, which is at 8%, and they've added another entry, which is entry number 1A. 1A इन्होंने add किया है and 1B add किया है. So they've basically bifurcated और specify कर दिया है as far as this entire construction industry is concerned. So the serial that they have added is services of dredging and rock and silt removal. ये एक specific service है जो construction sector से belong करती है, तो that is also at reduced rate 8%. And then they have added 1B, which is a construction services by property developers and promoters. तो ये इन्होंने ऐड कर दिया है और उस पे फिर इन्होंने रेट को एज पर स्क्वायर यार्ड ऑफ लैंड से इन्होंने बेसिकली फिक्स कर दिया है. So this is one another major change. अच्छा, this is also, इसमें आपको एक बात याद रखनी है, जो हमने आबाद की जजमेंट, एसोसिएशन ऑफ बिल्डर्स एंड डेवलपर्स की जजमेंट का जिक्र किया था, अभी भी कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर के अंदर practically there are still serious issues. I think even tax authorities are confused कि उसको कैसे लेके चलना है या कैसे उसको invoke करना है, कैसे implement करना है, because a lot of players in the construction industry, they are either not registered. अगर registered हैं तो वो returns की filing इस वक्त nil हो रही है या सही तरीके से नहीं हो रही है, because बहुत ज़्यादा confusion है. कंस्ट्रक्शन के जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स होते हैं जिसमें गुड्स का एलिमेंट है, सर्विस का एलिमेंट है, दैट इज आल्सो अंडर डिस्प्यूट. जैसे मैंने कहा कि हाई कोर्ट्स की भी अलग अलग जजमेंट्स हैं, तो ये एक ऐसी चीज है जिसको मिच्योर होना है और इसमें बहुत ज्यादा कंफ्यूजन है. तो दैट इज अनदर चेंज. इसके अलावा एक चेंज ये है कि रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन मे बी रिक्वायर्ड टू डिस्प्ले टैक्स नोटिसेस. एक नया सेक्शन इंसर्ट हुआ है सेक्शन 52A के नाम से. देन कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी का एक इन्होंने सेक्शन इंट्रोड्यूस किया है ताकि जो 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 डेटा है वो कॉन्फिडेंशियल रहे, तो उसको उन्होंने एक लीगल कवर दिया है. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट आई थिंक देयर इज नथिंग, ऐसी कोई सिग्निफिकेंट चेंज नहीं है इसके अलावा. एजुकेशन के अंदर दे हैव अगेन थोड़ा सा और इसको बाइफिकेट कर दिया है. देयर 3 कैटेगरीज नाउ विद इन दैट एजुकेशन सेक्टर. वो मैं आपको भी एग्जैक्ट वो भी दिखा देता हूँ जो चेंज इन्होंने किया है, ताकि आपको टेबल में भी नजर आ जाए. So basically it has been restructured effectively. So this is the entry, that this is serial number 30 in the first schedule. कि पहले एजुकेशन सर्विसेज वर एग्जेम्प्ट, एक थ्रेशोल्ड था जैसे मैंने पहले भी बताया था, and I think that was 500,000 per annum per student, right? Now what they've done is that they have structured it or restructured it. So education services जो है वो अपनी जगह मौजूद है, स्पोर्ट्स एजुकेशन सर्विसेज अपनी जगह मौजूद है. दे हैव एडेड a new category called special education for children with special needs and adult literacy, and that is exempt. So they've added a new category, which is the third category. वो ये रही यहाँ पे, स्पेशल एजुकेशन फॉर चिल्ड्रन विद स्पेशल नीड्स एंड अडल्ट लिटरेसी प्रोग्राम्स को मैं हाईलाइट कर रहा हूँ यहाँ पे. सो ये इन्होंने ऐड किए एंड दैट इज एग्जेम्प्ट. उसमें एज सच कोई मॉनेटरी थ्रेशोल्ड नहीं है. सो that's another change that is perhaps relevant to the education sector. इसके अलावा आई थिंक कोई ऐसी चेंज नहीं है. हाँ, एक पेनल्टी इन्होंने इंट्रोड्यूस की है. दिस इज फॉर सप्लायर्स ऑफ नॉन कंप्लाइंट इनवॉइसिंग सॉफ्टवेयर. सेक्शन 43 में they've added serial number 2AA. ये उन लोगों को उन्होंने टारगेट किया है जो बेसिकली इनवॉइस का सॉफ्टवेयर दे रहे हैं, जो पॉस एसेंशियली दे रहे हैं, इंटीग्रेशन की सर्विसेज दे रहे हैं. एंड अगेन एक प्रैक्टिकल इशू है हमारे यहाँ कि a lot of these alleged IT vendors, वो सही तरीके से उनके सिस्टम्स काम नहीं कर रहे होते. तो आई थिंक उनको थोड़ा टारगेट करने के लिए, उनको एड्रेस करने के लिए ये प्रोविजन पेनल्टी का इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया है. इसके अलावा डी रजिस्ट्रेशन में टाइमलाइन को बस चेंज आया है कि उन्होंने थोड़ा सा उसको बढ़ा दिया है, बट नथिंग सिग्निफिकेंट देयर. दिस इज इम्पोर्टेंट आई थिंक, 60-day टाइम लिमिट फॉर इंक्वायरी बाय कमिश्नर अपील्स. तो पहले क्या होता था, पहले कमिश्नर अपील्स के का आई थिंक कोई ऐसा टाइम बाउंड नहीं था. नाउ अगर कमिश्नर अपील्स ने कोई फर्दर इंक्वायरी की करता है टू डिसाइड एन अपील, वो इंक्वायरी 60 days के अंदर अंदर कंप्लीट होनी चाहिए फ्रॉम द डेट ही गिव्स दैट ऑर्डर फॉर इंक्वायरी. सो ये बेसिकली इससे होगा ये कि एक टाइम बाउंड चीज हो जाएगी एंड प्रोबेबली एडजुडिकेशन जो कमिश्नर अपील स्टेज पे एज फार एज एसआरबी इज कंसर्न वो शायद बेहतर हो जाए जल्दी, मतलब उसका डिस्पोजल आई थिंक थोड़ा बेहतर हो जाएगा. सो दैट्स अनदर अमेंडमेंट. So I believe these were some of the core amendments which I wanted to go through. इसके अलावा if any specific questions the attendees can ask, participants ask, कोई issue नहीं है. Now I would just like to come on to some of the case studies. जो practical aspects हैं मैं थोड़ा सा वो discuss कर लेता हूँ. इसमें कुछ तो already हमने discuss कर लिए हैं. For example, हमने construction का discussion किया. Composite contracts का हमने discuss किया कि जो hybrid contracts होते हैं उसमें अभी इश्यू सबसे बड़ा जो इस वक्त लिटिगेशन चल रही है वो ये चल रही है कि होता ये है कि कोई एक बड़ी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एंटिटी एक पूरा का पूरा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, फॉर एग्जांपल उसको अपना एक नया यूनिट खड़ा करना है, तो पूरा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एक थर्ड पार्टी कंपनी को देते हैं. फिर वो थर्ड पार्टी कंपनी जो है वो उनको जब इनवॉइस करती है तो उनको सर्विस की इनवॉइस करती है. एंड देन दैट मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एंटिटी क्लेम्स दैट इनपुट अपने फेडरल सेल्स टैक्स लॉ में वो इनपुट क्लेम करते हैं. इशू क्या आता है, फेडरल सेल्स टैक्स अथॉरिटी कहती है कि यार ये तो इसमें तो गुड्स का भी एलिमेंट इन्वॉल्व है और बिल्डिंग मटेरियल्स का तो इनपुट आपको नहीं मिलेगा अंडर सेक्शन 8 ऑफ द फेडरल सेल्स टैक्स एक्ट. तो लिटिगेशन हो जाती है. इस मूट पॉइंट, द मूट पॉइंट इज दैट क्या वो गुड्स के ऊपर जो बिल्डिंग और सीमेंट और सरिये का गुड्स का इनपुट है क्या वो मिलना चाहिए नहीं मिलना चाहिए. टैक्स पेयर्स की कंटेंशन ये होता है कि भाई मैंने तो पूरा का पूरा स्टैंडर्ड रेट पे सर्विस सेल्स टैक्स डिस्चार्ज कर दिया, उसका इनपुट मैं क्लेम कर रहा हूँ एंड देयर इज नो बार ऑन दैट. सो यहाँ पे देखा जाएगा और जो कोर्ट्स ने भी एक प्रिंसिपल सेटल किया है, दैट इज द डोमिनेंट फैक्टर टेस्ट, कि सर्विस का डोमिनेंस ज्यादा है, गुड्स का डोमिनेंस ज्यादा है. ये चीज अभी एडजुडिकेट होके डिटरमिन होनी है. एंड आई थिंक let's see what happens, but this is a hot topic right now. At least tribunals पे हमें ये देखने को मिल रहा है कि ये cases चल रहे हैं and let's see what happens. But my understanding is कि अगर उसने सर्विस का पूरा इनपुट टैक्स जो आउटपुट टैक्स डिस्चार्ज कर दिया तो उसको इनपुट मिलना चाहिए, बिकॉज इस वक्त फेडरल सेल्स टैक्स लॉ में कहीं पे भी बार नहीं है. बार सिर्फ ये कि अगर मेरा रिड्यूस रेट होता तो मुझे इनपुट नहीं मिलता. तो दैट्स द कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पार्ट. रेंटिंग ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी को मैं इसलिए टच करना चाहूंगा बिकॉज अगेन ये बहुत ज्यादा हॉट टॉपिक है, इसके ऊपर लिटिगेशन चल रही है राइट नाउ. रेंटिंग ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी का केस इस वक्त सिंध हाई कोर्ट में पेंडिंग है फॉर एडजुडिकेशन. वहां पे स्टे ऑर्डर्स आर ऑपरेटिव. ऑल्दो इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी के अंदर जो SRB है या जो सिंध सेल्स टैक्स सर्विसेज एक्ट है, उसने रेंटिंग ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी को इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी का पार्ट बना दिया है और वो कहते हैं ये टैक्सेबल सर्विस है। बट अगेन इसके ऊपर लिटिगेशन चल रही है। ये मैटर ऑलरेडी डिसाइड हो चुका था, उसको काउंटर करने के लिए इन्होंने ये अमेंडमेंट की है। अंडर एजुकेशन स्टे ऑर्डर्स आर ऑपरेटिव। इसमें जो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है कि फ्रॉम अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल स्टैंड पॉइंट जो जो मेन इसमें ग्राउंड है वो ये है कि क्या प्रोविंस के पास ये लेजिस्लेशन है कि किसी चीज को ये डिक्लेयर करना कि ये सर्विस है या ये सर्विस नहीं है। माय ओपिनियन और माय इंटरप्रिटेशन इज दैट ये पावर सिर्फ और सिर्फ फेडरेशन के पास है, यानी पार्लियामेंट फेडरल अथॉरिटीज के पास है, फेडरेशन के पास है, सॉरी, कि वो ही ये लेजिस्लेट कर सकते हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में अमेंडमेंट करें कि क्या रेंट सर्विस है या नहीं है। बिकॉज इंडिया के अंदर अगर आप इंडिया को स्टडी करें या देखें तो वहां पे उन्होंने अपने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में डिफाइन कर दिया है। सो आई थिंक दिस इज समथिंग दैट is most likely to be decided or adjudicated in favor of the taxpayers. यहाँ पे एक और recently I think in the summer vacations एक और केस फाइल हुआ सिंध हाई कोर्ट में जहाँ पे जो मैरिज हॉल्स हैं उनको भी SRB ने शो कॉज नोटिस इशू किए। दे ऑल्सो कंबाइन करके दे ऑल्सो वेंट टू द सिंध हाई कोर्ट और उनको उनको भी इस वक्त स्टे ऑर्डर मिला हुआ है। उनका भी कहना ये है कि भाई हम तो अपना मैरिज हॉल्स रेंट पे दे रहे हैं और रेंट तो सर्विस ही नहीं है। तो दे आर ऑल्सो यू नो राइट नाउ इन एजुकेशन के मैरिज लॉन्स या मैरिज हॉल्स जो कर रहे हैं क्या वो सर्विस है या नहीं है। तो दैट्स अ प्रैक्टिकल एस्पेक्ट जो कि अंडर एजुकेशन है। तो जिसमें तीसरी चीज है मल्टी प्रोविंस प्रोविंशियल फर्म प्रोफेशनल फर्म। So for example, a firm like us or other firms जो different provinces के अंदर services दे रहे हैं, जैसे सिंध के अंदर हमारा जो रेट है वो 8% है। बाकी प्रोविंसेस में जो जो मल्टी उसमें भी इश्यूज हैं। अगर आप एक जगह पे हो और ये सिंध में बैठ के आप पंजाब में काम कर रहे हो और पंजाब आप इनवॉइस जो है वो एज पर सिंध लॉ बिकॉज यूर रेजिडेंट ऑफ सिंध तो आपको सिंध की इनवॉइस इशू करनी है। बट वहां पे PRA आपको आपके क्लाइंट को तंग करेगा, बोलेगा कि आपने सर्विस यहाँ ली है तो आप हमें टैक्स दो। इसका ये भी एक प्रैक्टिकल इशू है। इसका सोल्यूशन इस वक्त ये है मेरी नजर में कि आप अगर आपका क्लाइंट पंजाब में है आप पंजाब के अंदर अपना एक रजिस्टर्ड ऑफिस एड्रेस लें प्लीज, वहां पे अपने आप को रजिस्टर कराएं और PRA को PRA में ही रहने दें। अदरवाइज जब तक ये आपस में बैठ के प्रोविंसेस को इसके ऊपर कोई रूल प्रोमलगेट नहीं करते, इसको नोटिफाई नहीं करते, तब तक प्रैक्टिकल हल ये है और एक स्ट्रेस फ्री हल ये है कि आप अगर पंजाब में काम कर रहे हैं यानी पंजाब में सर्विस दे रहे हैं तो पंजाब से ही इनवॉइस इशू कराएं और पंजाब में ही वो उसको ओरिजिनेट भी पंजाब में करें और टर्मिनेट भी पंजाब में करें। अदरवाइज आप इस क्रॉस जो प्रोविंस की आपस में लड़ाई है उसमें आप क्या कहते हैं शहीद हो जाएंगे, आई डोंट नो। तो ये एक प्रैक्टिकल इशू है। इसी तरीके से अगर आप IT सर्विसेज एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं और लोकल दे रहे हैं तो एक्सपोर्ट का आपको पता है कि IT सर्विस इज जीरो रेटेड ऑब्वियसली विद द कंडीशंस व्हिच आर स्पेसिफाइड अंडर फर्स्ट शेड्यूल। और डोमेस्टिकली अगर आप IT की सर्विस दे रहे हैं आई थिंक उस पर आई बिलीव द रेट इज 3%। तो उसमें कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है जब आप अपना रिटर्न फाइल करें। जस्ट मेक श्योर दैट यू आर फुलफिलिंग द कंडीशंस द रिक्वायर्ड कंडीशंस, बट रिमेंबर कि रिड्यूस रेट के अगेंस्ट आपको इनपुट टैक्स नहीं मिलेगा, राइट। सो जस्ट कीप दैट इन माइंड। इसमें एक चीज मैं ऐड कर दूं कि ये भी एक डिबेट है कि जो सॉफ्टवेयर है, मैं अगर एक सॉफ्टवेयर बेच रहा हूं तो सॉफ्टवेयर क्या वो प्रोडक्ट है या वो सर्विस है। तो दैट इज समथिंग it has to be again decided or matured as far as the Pakistan jurisdiction is concerned. इंडिया में एक बहुत फेमस केस था टाटा कंसल्टेंसी का एंड वहां पे ये होल्ड किया गया था कि वो जो प्रोडक्ट है, एंड आई शेयर दैट जजमेंट विद यू इफ आई रिमेंबर करेक्टली, उन्होंने यही होल्ड किया था कि दैट इज ए गुड, इट्स नॉट ए सर्विस। कि वो कस्टमाइज वर्सेस अनकस्टमाइज के ऊपर उनकी डिबेट थी। वो ये था कि अगर कोई ऐसा सॉफ्टवेयर है जो जो टेलर्ड नहीं है तो वो गुड्स की डेफिनेशन में आएगा। तो पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी हमारे यहाँ भी ये चीजें मेच्योर होंगी, टाइम लगेगा। बट दीज आर ऑल दोज एरियाज व्हिच वी कॉल ग्रे एरियाज। कुछ इस वक्त सिंध हाई कोर्ट में है अंडर एजुकेशन, कुछ अभी तक जो है वो हाई कोर्ट में गए नहीं है वो मैटर्स अभी तक। कुछ ऐसे मैटर्स हैं जो प्रोविंसेस को आपस में बैठ के थ्रू द नेशनल टैक्स काउंसिल और थ्रू द IPC इनको रिजॉल्व करना है, जैसे इन्होंने दूसरी सर्विसेज के लिए किया है। सो एज ए सेट कि प्रैक्टिकली इस वक्त जो ऐसी चीजें हैं उसको आपको प्रैक्टिकल एक हल ढूंढना है, प्रैक्टिकल सोल्यूशन ढूंढना है। द बेस्ट वे इन माय व्यू इज कि आप अगर कोई सर्विस कहीं पे टर्मिनेट हो रही है और वो प्लेस ऑफ प्रोविजन ऑफ रूल्स में वो सर्विस नहीं है, तो बेहतर यही है कि आप उसको उसी प्रोविंस के डोमेन में अगर रख सकते हैं तो रखें, ताकि आपको उसी एक सर्विस के लिए मल्टीपल प्रोविंस से डील ना करना पड़े. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation and with a bundle of thanks to the ICAP committee, Ijlal Sahab, Salahuddin Sahab, जिन्होंने मुझे अपॉर्चुनिटी दी. आई होप दैट आई वाज एबल टू ऐड सम वैल्यू. थोड़ी बहुत इंफॉर्मेशन शायद आपको मुझसे मिली हो. आई होप दैट कोई क्वेश्चंस हो, Q&A का बॉक्स ओपन है एंड आई विल ट्राई माय बेस्ट कि मैं आपके क्वेश्चंस को अच्छी तरीके से आंसर करने की कोशिश करूं. और अगर इफ आई एम नॉट एबल टू, देन यू कैन ऑलवेज सेंड एन ईमेल टू ICAP, तो मैं वहां से फिर आपको सेटिस्फाई करने की कोशिश करूंगा. थैंक यू.
Right. Acha, Ali Saab, thank you very much for quite a comprehensive and knowledgeable session on Sindh Sales Tax. So there are just like three questions. So if you can just see at the bottom Q&A section, so you can easily, I can, you can respond to those. Bottom Q&A section.
Yes, I got it. So kindly
Yeah.
also confirm as to when the sales tax liability is time barred and default surcharge implication from when on how to calculate it. So देखिए, टाइम बार्ड के लिए जैसे मैंने कहा, आपको सेक्शन 23 को पढ़ना पड़ेगा और आपको ये देखना पड़ेगा कि शो कॉज नोटिस कब इशू हुआ है. जैसे 8 years की लिमिटेशन है व्हेन इट कम्स टू द टैक्स पीरियड एंड 5 years की लिमिटेशन है व्हेन इट कम्स टू द फाइनेंशियल ईयर. तो उस एस्पेक्ट से आपको देखना होगा. एंड देन अगर शो कॉज नोटिस विद इन टाइम इशू हुआ है, फॉर एग्जांपल फॉर आर्ग्यूमेंट से हम कहते हैं शो कॉज नोटिस वाज इशूड विद इन टाइम, देन यू हैव टू इंश्योर, आपको ये देखना है कि जो ऑर्डर पास हुआ है, क्या वो जो टाइमलाइन प्रिस्क्राइब की गई है 180 days की, प्लस 60 days से वो एक्सटेंड हो सकता है. तो अगर उसके अंदर है तो फिर टाइम बार्ड नहीं, अगर उसके अंदर है नहीं है तो फिर टाइम बार्ड है. रिमेंबर, एक और चीज बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है. सुप्रीम कोर्ट की एक लेटेस्ट जजमेंट है, आई थिंक इट वाज अ जजमेंट बाय जस्टिस शफी सिद्दीकी साहब, जहां पे इन्होंने ये होल्ड किया, दिस वाज फॉर कस्टम्स बट प्रिंसिपल ये होल्ड किया कि अगर एक्सटेंशन डिपार्टमेंट ने ली है आफ्टर द एक्सपायरी ऑफ द स्टैट्यूटरी पीरियड, यानी कि फॉर एग्जांपल एक्सटेंशन 180 days के बाद ली जाती है, तो दैट एक्सटेंशन इज नल एंड वॉइड. तो दैट इज अनदर एस्पेक्ट जो आपको देखना चाहिए. बाकी एज फार एज डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज इज कंसर्न, देखिए डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज का हमने ऑलरेडी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं. उसका जो रेलेवेंट प्रोविजन है वो 44 है. उसमें डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज में अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो टैक्स पेयर के लिए अगेंस्ट बात जाती है वो जाती है कि चाहे आपने जानबूझ के किया हो, यानी मेंस रिया हो ना हो, आपका गिल्टी माइंड हो ना हो, विलफुल हो ना हो, तो डिफॉल्ट सरचार्ज आपसे डिपार्टमेंट ले सकता है. उससे कोई बचत नहीं है और उसका फॉर्मूला भी है, इट इज इंटर बैंक रेट प्लस 3%, जो सेक्शन 44 सब सेक्शन ए में आपको मिल जाएगा. और अगर if the default is on account of tax fraud, then the default surcharge is at the rate of 2% per month and of the amount of tax evaded. तो obviously fraud के केस में जो benchmark है वो ज्यादा strict है. Second question, where supply of goods or services made to person by company and invoice is billed with sales tax and subsequently customer paid only the invoice amount, didn't pay the whole amount after deduction of withholding. In this case, what is the course of action of the company? So basically, I think आप यहाँ पे ये पूछना चाह रहे हैं कि जो सेल्स टैक्स की अमाउंट है जो डिडक्ट हुई है वो उस विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट ने जमा नहीं कराई. सो देखें, इसके अंदर अगर तो उसने जमा नहीं कराई आपके विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट ने, तो जब आपके खिलाफ असेसमेंट प्रोसीडिंग्स हों, देन यू हैव टू कोऑपरेट विद SRB. SRB आपसे पूछेगा कि आपने 80% जमा कराया है, आप मुझे ये बताओ कि आपको जब आपके कस्टमर ने पेमेंट की तो आपको 80% टैक्स के साथ पेमेंट की होगी, तो आपको प्रूफ ऑफ पेमेंट देना होगा, इनवॉइस की कॉपी देनी होगी. एंड वंस यू डू दैट, देन ऑब्वियसली SRB विल गो आफ्टर द विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट. वो अपने तरीके से करेंगे, लेकिन आपको SRB को सेटिस्फाई करना पड़ेगा. आई होप दिस इज द क्वेश्चन दैट यू आर ट्राइंग टू आस्क. So where supply of goods or invoice made with the person is invoice billed, so then when customer paid only the invoice amount and didn't pay the whole amount. और अगर वो सेल्स टैक्स की अमाउंट भी आपको पे नहीं करता, अगेन सेम कोर्स ऑफ एक्शन, आपको एसआरबी को प्रूफ ऑफ पेमेंट अलॉन्ग विद योर इनवॉइस देना पड़ेगा, जो कभी कभार प्रैक्टिकली आई थिंक चैलेंजिंग हो सकता है। अगर आपको बल्क में पेमेंट आती है तो उसको आप कैसे बाइफिकेट करोगे, क्या करोगे, ये प्रैक्टिकल इशू है अगर ऐसी बात है। बट अगेन आई मीन द बेस्ट यू कैन डू इज कि आप एसआरबी को इनवॉइस की कॉपीज दें, प्रूफ ऑफ पेमेंट्स दें, दैट्स द बेस्ट थिंग यू कैन डू। नंबर 3, sir, what to do when tax deducted by Food Panda does not appear in Annexure C1? How to adjust the tax against the tax liability? अच्छा, ये देखें, इसके लिए बेस्ट तरीकेकार ये है, ये एक प्रैक्टिकल मसला है, हमें हमारे क्लाइंट्स को भी फेस होता है। देखें, इसमें सबसे पहले तो आपको पोर्टल पे कंप्लेन लॉन्च करनी चाहिए, दैट्स द फर्स्ट थिंग यू डू, सो दैट यू डॉक्यूमेंट इट। सेकेंडली, एसआरबी का जो आईटी का डिवीजन है इन आर एक्सपीरियंसेस वो बहुत अच्छा है, बहुत कोऑपरेटिव है। आप एसआरबी के आईटी बेटिक के डिवीजन के पास इन पर्सन जाएं, अपनी प्ली लेके जाएं, उनके थोड़ा पीछे लगे तो आपका ये मसला हल हो जाएगा। और अगर फिर भी नहीं आता आपके एनेक्जर C1 के अंदर, देन यू फाइल योर रिटर्न। और चूंकि फूड पांडा ने ऑलरेडी आपकी विथहोल्ड लाइबिलिटी की हुई है, आप अपना रिटर्न फाइल करें, और आप ये करें कि आप एसआरबी, जब आप अपना अगला रिटर्न फाइल करें, चूंकि एसआरबी की नॉलेज में होगा, तो आप उसको अगले रिटर्न के अंदर ले लें। ऑब्वियसली यू नीड परमिशन फ्रॉम द आईटी फोक्स, बट हैविंग, जो हमारा एक्सपीरियंस रहा है ना, ये चीज अलाउ कर देते हैं, एसआरबी वाले फ्लेक्सिबल होते हैं, वो आपको अलाउ कर देंगे, थोड़ा पीछे लगना पड़ेगा। इसके बाद नंबर 4, कुड यू प्लीज शेयर दीज डॉक्यूमेंट्स आफ्टर द सेशन? ऑफ कोर्स, आई मीन जो आपको डॉक्यूमेंट्स चाहिए, अगर स्लाइड चाहिए तो वो मैं आपको शेयर कर दूंगा, अगर आपको केस लॉस कोई चाहिए तो वो भी शेयर कर दूंगा। कोई स्पेसिफिक चीज चाहिए जो आपको लगता है आप लोगों के लिए यूजफुल होगी, फील फ्री, मैं आपसे बिल्कुल शेयर करूंगा।
जी, हम ईमेल एड्रेसेस पे जो रजिस्ट्रेशन के लिए यूज किए उनसे शेयर कर देंगे। द लास्ट वन इज फ्रॉम मिस्टर हमादान।
Is any withholding rate different between individual and company for SST like in PST? देखिए, विथहोल्डिंग रेट का तो एसआरबी का जहां तक ताल्लुक है, तो एसआरबी में तो 20% ही है जो विथहोल्ड करना है विथहोल्डिंग एजेंट को, या 20% है या 100% है, बेस्ड ऑन द टैक्स एक्सट्रैक्शन फॉर्मूला। एसआरबी के अंदर मल्टीपल या वेरिंग रेट्स तो नहीं है।
ठीक है, तो आई गेस विद दिस क्वेश्चंस दैट वर requested have been answered. So, participants, if there are any further questions, kindly like type those as soon as possible. Otherwise, we wait for a couple of minutes and then we lead to closing the session. Okay, so thank you once again, Mr. Ali, for leading this wonderful session. And thank you all participants for joining. Take care. Allah Hafiz.
थैंक यू, अल्लाह हाफिज।